Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really complex legal decision that honestly tells a powerful human story. It's about a single, life-altering day at an airport and a fight for justice that spanned more than a decade. I mean, think about it. It's a terrifying question, right? And for one student, it became a shocking reality. His story kicks off on what should have been a totally normal, completely routine travel day. So let's set the scene. We're at Cairo Airport. The date is September 20th, 1986. A Nigerian student named Bob Ngozi Njoku is just in transit, flying from New Delhi back home to Lagos. Simple as that. But while he's waiting for his connecting flight, everything changes. The police search his luggage, and they claim they've found drugs. And just like that, his journey home is over. What starts next is a legal ordeal, a nightmare really, that's going to stretch on for more than a decade. And this is the moment, right here, where the entire case just splits right down the middle. We're left with two completely different stories about what happened, and only one of them can be true. Okay, so first up, let's look at this whole thing from Bob Njoku's perspective. This is his version of events, just as he laid them out in his complaint. So according to Njoku, this whole thing was a setup from the get-go. He claims the police slapped a fake entry visa in his passport. Why? To make a search that would have been illegal otherwise, since he was just a transit passenger. He insists the suitcase with the drugs, not even his. It had a different name on it, a different weight. Then he says he was forced to sign a confession in Arabic, a language he couldn't even read. And the trial? He calls it a sham, over in 5 minutes with no translator. The result of all this? A life sentence. All right, so that's one side of the story. Now let's flip the coin and see what the government of Egypt had to say. And as you can probably guess, they paint a very, very different picture. So right away, these two stories just crash into each other over this entry visa. Njoku calls it a fake, just a flimsy excuse for an illegal search. But Egypt? They argue it was a totally legitimate and necessary legal step. Their logic is, look, to investigate a crime, we have to formally admit him into the country. A transit lounge isn't some kind of lawless zone, right? And what about that confession he said he was forced to sign in Arabic? Well, Egypt's response is basically, yeah, that didn't even matter. They state that the courts actually acknowledged that Njoku denied being guilty, so that signed piece of paper, it wasn't even used to convict him in the end. Okay, and the lawyer. Njoku's side is that his lawyer was completely ineffective, maybe even scared of the judge. Egypt fires back saying, no way. They point to all the appeals filed on his behalf as proof that he had competent counsel. I mean, they argue an incompetent lawyer wouldn't have been able to take the case all the way to the nation's highest court. So, after hitting a brick wall with every appeal in Egypt, Njoku has one last shot. He takes his case international, to a higher authority, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And you really need to see this timeline to appreciate just how long this all took. It's 5 years just to get through all the appeals inside Egypt. And then another 6-year wait for the African Commission to even deliver their final ruling. That's 11 years. Think about that. For more than a decade, Bob Njoku's entire life is just hanging in the balance, waiting for someone, anyone, to give him a final answer. So what does this African Commission actually do? This is super important to understand. They are not a higher court. Their job isn't to look at the evidence and decide if Njoku was guilty or innocent. Nope. Their whole purpose is to make sure countries are following the rules of the African Charter, which is this big treaty that protects people's basic rights. So the commission had one fundamental question to answer, and it wasn't, did he do it? The question was this: did Egypt, during the arrest and trial, violate Bob Njoku's human rights as laid out in the Charter? It's all about the process, not the crime. And so after years of looking at all the arguments from both sides, on November 11, 1997, the commission finally reached its decision. And the ruling was, well, it was totally unambiguous. The commission considers that no provision of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights has been violated. In other words, from a procedural standpoint, they found that Egypt had followed the rules. Now, the why behind this decision is really interesting. The commission makes it super clear that their job isn't to act like a higher court of appeal and second-guess the facts. That, they say, is the job of the Egyptian courts. Their one and only purpose was to see if the state's own laws were followed, and on that very narrow procedural question, they decided the answer was yes. So here's the final decision. First, no violation found. The legal process was sound. Second, the case is officially closed. But then there's this third part, a kind of plea for mercy. The commission actually tasks one of its own members to go ask the Egyptian government for clemency for Mr. Njoku, not because of the law, but on purely humanitarian grounds. And that leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? When the process is followed perfectly, when every box is checked, does that always equal justice? This case really forces you to think about that sometimes blurry line between what is legally correct and what we, feel in our gut is truly just.